Richard Lennox liked to remind people of their place. It was a hobby he kept polished like his cufflinks, an invisible etiquette he expected others to follow. That evening at Le Beau, he tilted his glass toward a young waitress and said with the bored amusement of someone who never feared consequence, "Sing for us." The room stilled. Silence curated by wealth is never accidental. It is a tool. Heads turned, forks paused. He smiled as if he'd given a gift. He did not know he had handed a fuse. Amara had learned to take small humiliations and store them like pebbles in a jar, each one smooth and heavy, kept separate so they would not become a single hungry thing. She had polished china and emptied bins and soothed workers' kids while keeping her voice small enough to not draw attention. But she had not forgotten the music that once saved her the night she thought everything might end. She had given up a scholarship for a child, and in rooms like this, she was expected to make herself forget. "Sing something patriotic," Richard barked, trying to steer the moment into comfort. "Sing something safe." The laugh that followed was a polite ripple. People who benefit from power enjoy the sound of it. Amara walked to the piano with the steadiness of someone who had practiced. Courage in private. She did not look at him. She surveyed the faces around her, a mother balancing a stroller, a young couple glued to a screen, a man in an expensive suit whose eyes were kind in the way some people are kind to dogs. She sat and set her hands on the keys, though she would not play. Her voice came first, low and plain, a thread that threaded through the room. At first the song was a memory, a lullaby about mornings that begin before dawn and the small brave promises mothers make. Then her chest expanded, and the sound found a color few expected, warm, contained, and then suddenly vast. It was the kind of singing that feels like a truth arriving. Richard's smirk sharpened into confusion. He hadn't planned for honesty. His joke had been meant to puncture, not produce a revelation. Phones slipped from pockets. A few guests reached for their cameras with the flustered excitement of people who sense they are witnessing something rare. The melody threaded through names and neighborhoods, tiny markers in the lyrics that carried weight. Because they matched headlines people had skimmed, housing projects, contractor names, places where promises had been auctioned off and never delivered. The song was both performance and indictment. It softened and then it cut. When the last note trembled free, the silence that followed was not polite. It was stunned. Applause arrived, but it was the type that asked questions. Why had she been hidden? Who had the right to call a life ordinary? Richard sat frozen, the red wine cone in his glass, catching the light like an accusation. "Where did you train?" someone whispered, the question a bridge between curiosity and accountability. Amara answered, with a quiet once, which was both true and insufficient. She had the kind of background that didn't fit the cheap assumptions, a scholarship interrupted by motherhood, and a resilience shaped by having to choose which parts of herself to show. The clip went up, 20 seconds of raw voice. Within hours it had been shared and reshared with captions that tangled praise with rage. "Watch the millionaire's face when the waitress sings," and "voice that exposes more than talent." The internet is a wild ledger. It takes moments and turns them into narratives. Viewers added context, and in the context, the small song became a mirror. People began to comment with their own stories. A landlord who took advantage, a boss who lied, a neighbor who was ignored. The song gave the overlooked permission to be seen. Attention arrived as a force that can both save and consume. Offers emerged. Agents, TV producers, even a call from a small nonprofit that wanted to sponsor childcare. Journalists wanted quotes. Producers wanted exclusive meetings. For Amara, the new light was dizzy and alarming. She had not sung to go viral. She had sung because staying small felt like a second grief. Yet the light opened doors she had thought had been shut. And it revealed things Richard had not meant to be revealed. Because Richard had a history. He operated in a world where contracts spoke louder than ethics, and where names were shifted to shield bad behavior. He had courted investors with neat slides and softer language about project efficiencies. The euphemism for corners cut on roofs and heat denied to families who'd been promised safety. The song mentioned an address and a name that fit a crooked Line on a spreadsheet, viewers with long memories began to ask questions. A local reporter chased a lead. Documents leaked. The small, piercing song that had lived 30 seconds on a phone began to align with piles of paper. Richard's allies tried to control the narrative. They released a statement about staged performances and exaggerations, insinuating she had manufactured the moment. They posted a polished family portrait and labeled the viral clip as a moment blown out of proportion. But once an image gives people a place to aim their outrage, it is hard to corral. People sat with the song in their minds, and then they sat with the numbers that began to appear, budgets that didn't add up, pages missing from reports, invoices paid to shell companies with familiar initials. That is how a melody turned into a dossier. Not because a voice alone is evidence, but because a voice often opens the door to the rest. Amara kept her dignity like a ledger, careful, precise, ready to use every small entry when the time came. Not for revenge, but to build restitution and restore what had been stolen. She used the attention like any careful craftsman uses a light, to reveal hidden flaws. Journalists came for records. A federal investigator listened to the recordings she had kept for months, small files saved between shifts. Together they connected the dots, payments rerouted, contractors who billed for work never done, permits, signed, and then quietly buried. The song had been the spark. The documents were the fuel. In a hearing room packed with residents from neighborhoods once promised homes, the prosecutor played the recordings and laid out the ledger. Richard tried the old deflections, claims of misinterpretation, pleas about reputation, but invoices and interviews tightened into a single narrative. When Amara stood, she did not perform. She spoke plainly, names, dates, the way promises had been broken. Her voice did not soar for applause. It cut to facts. The fallout was fast. Contracts were voided, funds were returned, and regulators moved to rebuild what had been lost. Richard's company collapsed under its own misdeeds, power built on quiet, cruelty fractures under daylight. He found that the silence he liked to wield could be turned into judgment. Exposure leaves a kind of inaudible sentence. Amara's life changed, but not into the kind of spectacle the tabloids promised. She accepted compensation for harmed communities and insisted the recovered funds go to repairs, childcare, and scholarships. She helped start a small program to support working mothers with rehearsal time and childcare, so talent would not have to be abandoned for necessity. The public loved the headline. Waitress sings down Millionaire, but the deeper work was quieter. Policy fixes, community councils, contracts rewritten to include oversight. Richard tried to marshal old favors and polish a legacy, but the court's ruling and the restitution plan spoke louder. He watched from a distance as a scholarship fund in his family name opened its first class, and as families moved into housing that matched the promises once made to them. His silence after her song became something else, the long consequence of choices made to conceal and dismiss. Amara returned to small things with new steadiness. She sang when invited, always requesting proceeds benefit the communities she fought for. She mentored young singers not just in technique, but in how to be meticulous, how to record an insult, how to save a receipt, how to turn indignity into documentation. She taught the next generation to combine art with evidence. The moment resonated, because art opened ears and facts closed cases. Her voice gave people permission to look, and the paperwork provided the means to act. She had not sought humiliation for its own sake. She had wanted to be heard. His stunned silence was not only astonishment, it was the prelude to accountability. The voice left him speechless, and in that hush, a city learned how to listen. Months later, at a ribbon cutting for a modest housing complex rebuilt with recovered funds, Amara stood to the side and watched children run down safe stairs. A woman she had once served hugged her and said, "You did this." The sentence carried many small recoveries, medical bills paid, a summer camp funded, a mother who could stop choosing between food and a night shift. Amara thought of the ledger she had kept and the recorder in her apron and recognized that courage often looks like paperwork. It is slow, stubborn, and necessary. If Amara's story moved you, please hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. We publish underdog stories that turn injustice into real change. Share this video to amplify voices that need to be heard, and drop a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated or seen someone quietly turn the tables? The best stories will be featured next, so tell us yours.